So I would like to introduce Cindy McKean. Cindy is the world's top expert for astromapping. She's an instructor at Kepler College who teaches beginners to advanced courses in various astromapping techniques. She helped develop our astromapping certificate and the advanced certificate and helps make Kepler College the premier school in the world for 3D astrology. Cindy completed her advanced diploma and astromapping certificate with Kepler College. She is also certified in astrocartography through Continuum, the Jim Lewis Legacy Foundation. Before becoming a full-time astrologer, Cindy was a physician and clinical research director at Weill Cornell Medical College. Her innovations in the medical field set standards that are still used today. When she moved to her Pluto IC line, her whole life changed. She launched a full-time esoteric business and soon after was invited to present astrology on TV, newspapers, national magazines, radio, and podcasts. And you can learn from her at Kepler College. We're very excited to have Cindy as part of our program. In her free time, Cindy co-creates Meteor, a 3D astrology software aiming to bridge the gap between astronomy and astromapping. She offers readings, consultations, and public speaking and can be reached through her websites, theoracles.com, and I thought there was a second one, but that's her website, theoracles.com, and we will post that information in the chat box. And now I have the pleasure to introduce you to Joseph Milnes. Joseph is the Chief Executive Officer, founder, creator, and lead software developer of the astrologeeks.com astrology software platform. He specializes in astronomy, astrocartography, and compass astrology within the field of astromapping, including astronomical mathematics. I expect we're going to hear a lot about that today. His love for astrology began when he was only 6 years old, and he began studying the subject at age 15. His study of software programming and graphic design also began at the same time, including studying the performing arts such as vocal performance, music theory, and digital music production. You can find Joseph at astrologeeks.com. I'm so excited for this presentation. So if you have questions for Joseph and Cindy, please make sure you're putting them in the Q&A box and feel free to chat away with your peers in the chat box. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Cindy and Joseph.
Hello, hello. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Misty. And most of all, thanks to the participants who have come. This is really exciting. I think this is the first time that we're actually premiering the astronomy with astromapping because it's super complex, but we simplify it for you. That's what we're here for at Kepler College. And it took a long time. I'll be honest with you about that. But what was nice is when I met Joseph and I told him about all these ideas and we sat together and we hashed it out. He's the technical and mathematic genius. I don't do any of the math. So when we bring this course to you, not to worry. There's absolutely no math, no formulas, no programming, no equations. It's a lot of concepts to get you to understand. So don't worry about it, but it's going to be very hands-on. We're going to need your participation live. That's part of the teaching process in this class. It's considered a practicum. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to inform you about a lot of things. We're going to kind of showcase a lot of things, but really we're here to give you an idea of some concepts. So like I said, Joseph is very technical and he'll get to the analytical technical part, but don't get scared because I do hear almost every single astrologer I know has this allergic reaction to astrology. So let me get my windows situated here. You could all see my screen share, correct? I guess you can.
Yes, I can see it, Cindy.
Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome. And Laurie already gave the an introduction. Here you go, screenshots just for some links. Misty is going to provide you with those links as well. And just a little bit about me. We've already covered that. The other website was the Kansas City Astrology. And then the social media links that Misty will provide you as well. And Lori's already provided you with the upcoming class. We're going to dive right into the meat of this. So if you've been following me at all, you know that astromapping is the subject that I rave about. And it's essentially the astrology of time and space. And since we are a product of our time and the place that we were born, how appropriate is it? It's categorized as a branch of astrology, but I like to argue that it's actually a foundation of astrology because it's not just looking at the 2D charts and maps that require, rote memorization to get meaning. How planetary energies can manifest for you is inherent by just knowing the characteristics of the planets. And that's one of the things that we're going to be bringing to you, this 3D immersion to where it just becomes like, oh, well, of course, that's the way it is. Contrary to popular belief, astromapping isn't new. I know a lot of people think Jim Lewis invented it, but what he really did is he cracked the code in the modern age of how to put maps, how to put planets on angles on maps. And really, this has been going on since ancient times. And what they did more so of is the local space, because it was really about the dome above their head. And they were aware that the Earth actually moved. They didn't think it was like the magical dome in the sky, so to speak. But there's many cultures around the world that do this. I got the trend with astromapping started back up in late 2020, early 2021, and we've been going ever since. Are you ready? So it's absolutely fascinating and eye-opening when you start to dig for reasons rather than look in a radial chart. No, the reason why you slipped on a banana peel was not because transiting Jupiter was quinque, undecile, your progressed maki and parallel your natal Saturn. It was because you were on a Neptune line. And Neptune tends to obscure what normally can't be seen. And yes, it can be quite slippery. It's fun actually seeing the changes around you and the instant gratification of it. I needed to make more money at some point. 2018, this was when I was really diving into this. And I said, I had a workstation before everybody, I was doing my readings online and by phone before it really became such a big trend after, the pandemic. So I thought, how do I make more money? Well, Jupiter could help with that. So I set up my desk. I put a map, essentially. This was the upstairs of where I was living. And I put the local space map over the upstairs area. And I found where Jupiter was. And I essentially set up my workstation there to get that energy directly from Jupiter as much as I could. And literally overnight, I started getting more bookings. I started getting, more income with that. And I even got invited on ABC News to talk about astrology on their evening TV broadcast later that week. And I actually had to travel 750 miles for that. So broadcasting, long distance travel, more income. Hello, Jupiter. Well, I was really getting fully booked weeks in advance. But 3 months later, I decided I have to move my workstation. And the reason why, I gained 18 pounds. I was just sitting at my desk working all the time, and I was, I was even eating lunch at my desk and grabbing, Jupiterian type of fatty foods. And yeah, that's not really good to do. Jupiter has a tendency to really expand, including the waistline. See, I learned quite a good lesson from that, is that you have to kind of watch what you're doing and how you use the planetary energies, and there's ways to balance it out. Now, when we talk about astromapping, there's a lot of different perspectives of it, and the two most popular are astrocartography and local space. And we're going to talk about planetary ascensions as well, and geospatial aspects. Joseph is going to get a lot more into that. But the two popular ones, astrocartography is actually dealing with the celestial sphere. It's the fixed grid in the sky that gives our celestial bodies addresses. It's the basis for astrocartography, planets conjunct angles. Now, there's the horizontal perspective, and yes, it is spelled correctly. I know there is a school of thought that says horizontal, but I stick with horizontal because it does match with horizon anyway. And that could work with local space, compass astrology, geospatial aspects. Those are the planets above the sky that we could see from our location, and it's limited by our horizon. So if you're in the continental USA, for example, and if you're at the North Pole and you want to see Polaris, the star, you're going to have to tilt your head like all the way backwards, pretty much, just so you could see Polaris. However, if we get down to the equator and say that we're a mile north of the equator, you're going to see Polaris right there. You just have to look straight ahead. You don't have to tilt your head back. It's going to be on the horizon. If you're a mile south of the equator, you won't be able to see it. Not if you're even on the top floor of the tallest skyscraper. It's literally our view of the sky limited by our horizon, which is why it's local space. If we were in the southern hemisphere, we would look for Sigma Octantis, which is pretty much the stellar counterpart of Polaris in the southern hemisphere. And if you were in the northern hemisphere, just north of the horizon, you would never be able to see stellar Octantis. So let me help with that perspective, because horizon, what really is the horizon? Yes, it's where the sky meets the ground, so to speak. But have you ever tried to go to the horizon? It's as elusive as the end of the rainbow, isn't it? But there's different kinds of horizons. So we have true horizon, where the Earth meets the sky, visible horizon, where it is looking as far as the eye could see, and then the zenith or zenith. I use them interchangeably, and that's 90 degrees altitude from the visible horizon. Essentially, it's the spot right above your head. Now, the horizon is where the line of your gaze is tangent to the ground. That's more of the scientific description of it. So say that you're standing wherever it is that you are on the Earth, and that's the tangent. That's what we would call the true horizon. And you see, it's kind of limited as a bubble. Now, if you're looking really far out into space, into sky, that's called the visible horizon, and it's infinite, as far as the eye could see. And then 90 degrees from that is the zenith. When you look up into the sky above your head, of course, that's also as far as the eye could see. And the nadir's not visible. The Earth is in the way. Now, here's a tall skyscraper. I should have made it a little bit brighter. I should have made it hot pink, but let's pretend that there's on the same latitude and a different longitude, there's a skyscraper. Well, you wouldn't be able to see it if it goes beyond the limits of your local horizon, the tangent. But if there was a birdie out there, the birdie could actually see it. You know, the bird's eye view. So the birdie might be able to see just a tippy top, depending on where it is, like how high up in the sky it is. And if you ever get beyond the horizon and you get to the end of the rainbow, please share that pot of gold with us. Now, I'm Gen X. I don't know if you guys remember this from a long time ago, but I think the show was like a Canadian show. I'm American, but I lived on the Canadian border, Buffalo, Niagara Falls, New York. And it was called The Kids in the Hall. And it was about these nerds. And the guy would be like, "I'm crushing your head." Nah, ha, ha, ha. And you would wonder, what is this nerd talking about? And you see him doing that, like pinching. And the camera finally gets behind his hands to see the perspective. And you could see he's kind of crushing somebody's head. It's really campy, but I thought it was really funny. But I thought it was also a great idea to share with you about different perspective, right? It's about from the vantage point that we see things. Now, just think about that. Stars at different distances will appear flat from our perspective. So when we're looking at the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper, we could see that these stars are actually they're in different distances out in the celestial sphere. The celestial sphere goes on infinitely. If you're wondering how far the horizon is, you could basically see about the human eye, a good human eyes on a clear day, probably see as far out as 3 miles or so. And when it goes to you looking out in space, again, it's as far as the eye could see and how much your eyes can adjust to the luminosity. You can find once you turn off all the equipment and everything, no lights, you're out in the dark and you're just looking at the beautiful sky above your head at nighttime. After a few minutes, you'll see more stars. After 15 minutes, even more stars. And usually within 30 minutes times, your rods and cones in your eyes are fully adjusted for maximum visualness of seeing as many stars as you could see. And again, it's interesting because in the winter sky, at least here in America, in northern latitudes, it tends to be clearer. There's less atmosphere in the way. So you can actually see more celestial bodies. In the summertime, where it's more comfortable to be out, sometimes the atmosphere is a little bit more thick. So choose your battles. Either choose the cold weather, or you choose to be comfortable and see less stars. And maybe sometimes in the summertime, occasionally you'll get some clear skies. Now, here's another thing about perspective, and this especially ties in with local space and geospatial aspects. So this is what they call in art a perspective sculpture. These are really beautiful sculptures that very talented artists are able to make. And here it just looks like a flock of birds that, are flying to some point. And then you turn a little bit in front of it, and it still kind of looks like a flock of birds, but in retrospect, you'll start to see something. And wow, it's starting to take shape like an eye. And remember I said in retrospect, you're kind of seeing it. You might not have recognized it. But then when you're looking at it straight forward, it's an eye. This and this are both the same. They're both the same sculpture. Now, that's how you could start to understand sometimes things like when planets are on the same declination, but they're kind of separated by a space in the sky, you could actually read it as conjunct each other. And the same thing too about like wide orbs or loose orbs, where, these definitely would be tight conjunctions where you could see the picture very clearly. The energy is there. This is a little bit of a looser conjunction. This, I would say, is a super loose conjunction. But, hey, if you want to reach for it, go ahead. Like I said, you could still see the shape. And out here, you barely see it. Maybe in retrospect, but you would have never guessed. So in other words, those energies wouldn't manifest this way. So on the side, you're watching a flock of birds, and in front of it, there's the big eye in the sky looking at you. Imagine that with the planets now. Another thing we're going to discuss a little bit in the class is orbs. And that essentially is the closer a celestial object, the bigger it appears. It's called magnitude. And you might have heard about magnitude with the solar eclipses. And as you see here, when it's further away from the Earth, it doesn't cover as much as the sun or obstruct as much of the sun. So we get an annular eclipse. And when it's closer to the Earth, we could get a total solar eclipse. And I think the one that we had in April was even more than 100% coverage. It was 102% coverage, I believe. And yeah, these are just the correspondence closer, just as examples. But here's the thing. We all know that Mars is a smaller planet than Jupiter. But there are times when Jupiter is closer to us while Mars is far away. It's in apogee and Jupiter is in perigee. Now, here's a picture of the sky. This is in Hawaii. And it's kind of hard to tell of these two luminal bodies, which one is Jupiter, which one is Mars. And this picture might not be as clear, but in real life, you'll be able to see that Mars indeed does have this bit of a reddish tinge to it. But here they kind of look the same size, don't they? Well, the one on the left is Mars, and the one on the right is Jupiter. And why does this matter with orbs? It's about luminosity and gravity. Einstein actually proved that correct. When we had there was an eclipse, it was either 1916 or 1919, where he was able to prove part of his theory of relativity, where it needed a big body for light to bend around it. And it actually changed the gravity of some of the planets, and that Jupiter was able to have more pull on Venus at that time. They were actually able to measure this. So yes, it does matter. And every planet has a different orb. And we'd have to look at each and every one of your charts in order to determine how far away it is. Maybe Jupiter has a stronger orb or a weaker orb. We also have to consider phases of these planets as well. And we'll go over a lot of these things in the astronomy class. We don't want to give you a fire hose of information in the astronomy class. We're going to teach you pretty hands-on of how to really pat down things like the difference between longitude and latitude and how it corresponds to declination and right ascension. We're also going to talk a little bit about the different Cartesian methods. Now, Jim Lewis uses Mercator maps. Mercator is a type of flat map. But as you see, this is a globe, and we're always looking at these flat maps on our programs. But how do they do it? There's a lot that's going on there. So here's a little video to show that, the Earth is kind of spliced apart into like these kind of orange clove type of shapes. And then once it gets all kind of spread out, they have to join the gaps. So think of Play-Doh when you're trying to join the gaps there. And take a look at how much Greenland, for instance, is starting to change in size because of the projections. Look at how much Antarctica changed in size. Even South America and Africa changed in size. These two got smaller. That might be something nice to keep in mind when you're doing your astrocartography. But the lines are accurately placed on astrocartography simply because what is it when we're dealing with astrocartography, planets on angles? It's great circles. And in simple, it's the largest circle that could be measured around a sphere. And more accurately, in mathematics, it's the circular intersection of the sphere and a plane crossing through the sphere's center point. And you notice I mentioned mathematics, and I did not once give you a number or a formula. I just don't like those things myself. So it could be in a range from horizontal or vertical. And any direction it goes in, all of those blue lines that I just put up there are all great circles, and they all go within the center. If it goes up anywhere away from the center, those are no longer great circles. Those are small circles. Sometimes they're called little circles. And the way we do it is we go by the XY coordinate on a circle. The technical term of these great circles is orthodrome. And whenever you have the prefix ortho, it means upright. So that's why when you go to like orthodontia or orthopedics, it's about getting things straight, essentially. Upright for planets means according to its axis. So Uranus, for example, would be almost sideways, and Earth is around 23.5 degrees on its tilt. And Earth, it's not shaped like an orange, it's shaped more like a tangerine. But whatever goes through these center lines. Now, when we have to spread these great circles into a sine wave, meaning it takes the concept of a rotating point on a circle and it plots it on the position of the y coordinate. And over time, it results in a wave pattern that represents a sine wave, or it looks like a parabola. So it's kind of cool once you see it. And I'm going to put up the X and Y anyway. Now, if this is getting your head all googly and like, I know, it feels that way. But as you see, what I put these up for is for you smarties that could actually do the math, unlike me. And we could see the Y coordinate. As it starts to get closer and closer to the X coordinate, it starts to get closer to the center line, and so on and so forth. And that's why you'll see it repeating itself until we could complete 360 degrees. So if you start to see things like more examples of, if you're seeing, this pink line is not a great circle. This purple is not a great circle. The red is not a great circle. The green it's not a great circle, even though it looks like it's pretty close to one. It's inaccurate because it's not a great circle. It's not even astrocartography because these are clearly not planets conjuncting angles, and they're not representative of how the planets' orbits go along our solar system. Maybe some asteroids might be like this, but no, if the planets were around us in the world, we'd have a totally different world, quite literally. A more accurate rendition, and this is from Astrolog by Walter Pullen, and I think you could get this in SolarFire. I'm not sure how to go into it. I usually like to stick to my Mac, but you could get this on your PC. But if you go to Astrolog, it's freeware. He's a professional engineer, and he created this. So this is more accurate. You could see these are planets conjunct angles. He's a guy, so of course he had to make it black and strong, and but take a look at the points at the top here too. These are he used the Edmundo technique. That's the way it's supposed to go. I'm going to get into a couple of map examples now. I wanted to talk about someone that is familiar, and Paris Hilton is definitely familiar. When I was looking for pictures of her grandfather, I found these pictures of her and when she was younger. And, of course, you think, oh, she looks more innocent. But no, you could see, she's got these, Paris was Paris since she was young. Interesting side note. But this is her grandfather, rest in peace, Baron Hilton. Yes, the founder of the Hilton Hotels empire. So I'll be able to zoom in on the next slide. So if it looks like it's too far away, don't worry about it. But there's two techniques in approaching a astrocartography map. And there is zodiacal or inmundo. And how do you know if one is zodiacal or one inmundo? Well, that comes down to where you could see the convergence of all the lines. And as you see, if I zoom in on it, whoops, my bad. Let's see if I could zoom in. Yes, if I zoom in on it, you could see that they all come to a point, essentially. That indicates it's zodiacal. Now, let's look at his chart really quick. I use Koch house systems, just as an FYI. And the reason is I was personally trained one-on-one by Martin Davis. May he rest in peace too. He was one of the great authors and researchers when it came to astromapping. And he described that Koch was a better house system to use with astrocartography. We'll get into that in the class. But what do we see here? He has Pluto at the very tippy top of his chart. Pluto conjunct the midheaven. That's pretty close. It's 2 degrees away. So we would expect, and he was born in Dallas. We could expect that it could be really close to him in Dallas. So I'll get close here. Actually, there was one thing I wanted to show you. I forgot about that. This is not an Enmundo. We don't use Enmundo. Let me get a little bit closer. I wanted to use this Enmundo map because I apologize. I missed my step there. With the Enmundo, you could see at the convergence, it doesn't come to a point. That is a more accurate rendition. And I'm going to show you a lot more reasons as to how and why they're also accurate renditions. So we already talked about his Pluto on the midheaven. That happens to be this line over here. And I'm going to come back to this map in a second. Right here, and this is the drop-down menu. This happens to be AstroGold software. I work on my Mac. I also like to use Meteor, of course, because, when you're looking for something, you have to, and you've programmed it, you tend to look at it, or Joseph programmed it, of course, but every software always has that one thing that the other softwares don't. So I would say if you're looking at astromapping software, you would have to have at least 2. It's really good if you're getting into professional astromapping, but even when you're doing it for yourself. But here's the drop-down menu, and I chose the Zodiacal. And this is where Dallas, Texas is. And his Pluto line is somewhat close. But what you might notice as well is that the Pluto is located right here on the ecliptic. But this is the zodiacal map. Now let me move it to his Enmundo map, and almost looks almost exactly placed where it was before. You could see one tiny hint in that Pluto is not on that ecliptic anymore. This curved line over here, I like to add the ecliptic in when I look at the maps as a coordinate. I don't add the tropics. You could add, there's a lot of different features that you could add. Luckily, AstroMaps does keep it simple so you don't get so lost in it. But one of the things I noticed right away is, if we look at this Jupiter and this North Node line, it's starting to kind of come closer right over around here. But if we go back to his, well, that's in the way. Let me get to the world maps then with him. If we go back to the zodiacal, and I'll zoom in over here just to give you an idea. The crossing or the Puran, when we would only know by looking at other different kinds of maps or looking at the chart and seeing if it's a telemic aspect or not. But you notice it happens above Canada in the sea. And that's in the zodiacal. Well, what about when we look at the Enmundo? Whoa, what a change. It happens over land. Imagine you moved to where you thought your crossing was going to be, wherever that latitude is. Not that I can imagine anyone that wants to live anywhere that cold, but imagine you did that to hope to get the benefit of the Puran rotating over you once a day, and you're absolutely missing it by latitude. You could have gone a lot more south and been a lot more warmer. The other thing that is interesting too is that whole thing I was talking about with the declination. And actually, let me get a side-by-side comparison of these charts. This might be a little bit easier. So this is the Enmundo. You guys could take a look at it and have fun on your own time. But one of the things, too, I wanted to talk about is that you could see with him when declination is inferred with the maps as well. And you can't get that from the radial charts, the round charts, your natal charts. It's more steep around the spring and fall equinoxes and less steep around the summer and winter solstices. So more steep around Aries, Libra, less steep around June and December. And the other thing you might notice about these maps too is that after it gets to a certain latitude, and again, it depends on the software that you're using, that the lines, they start to get, they kind of get like really flat. Like look at the way that Uranus, Moon, Jupiter, and Venus are kind of just going flat. So our software goes like, it shows the actual sine wave. But it's your preference. I mean, if you have software that creates the sphere, go for it. It's a lot funner and a lot more accurate to look at it that way. So we have to ask, why was Pluto similar using both techniques for Baron Hilton using the zodiacal and inmundo techniques? And the answer is you should check the years that Pluto was orbiting within the solar plane. And I have another example to show you the stark difference. Now, when he was born in 1927, Pluto was in the solar plane. It wasn't exact to our plane, which is why that 2 degrees was, you could see the difference there. But as you saw, the lines didn't move. And it's right ascension that these maps really show. And Joseph is really going to explain that. Benedict Cumberbatch. How English of a name can you get? And I think his middle name's like Carlton. It's like, without a doubt, you're an English person with a name like Benedict Cumberbatch, or at least it's English or UK inspired. This is the English actor and film producer, and he had starring roles in Hawking. It was like a telefilm, and in Sherlock, it was like a TV series, and he's been in a few things. And the chart that we're using with Benedict Cumberbatch is it's a B Rodden rating. So they put his time at 12 o'clock, but it's still a good example, regardless if it's really his chart or not, because Pluto, we're going to be looking at again. And what you could see here is that, and I'll zoom in on this, this slide on the left where we're using zodiacal. Here's something super interesting. Pluto on the ascendant. And in the zodiacal method, it shows that it's east of London. How is that? How is that? And if we look at his radial chart, Pluto is at 9 degrees, but the ascendant is at 8 degrees. That means Pluto is really above the horizon. It means it is already visible in the sky. It would have been west of him. So that's one of the ways that the zodiacal method is kind of out of reach. And it's 31 miles east of the horizon in the zodiacal method. But in the inmundo method, it's west, because right ascension is factored for 527 miles west of the horizon. Holy guacamole, why? And there's only that 1 degree difference. We saw with Baron Hilton's chart that, the 2 degrees didn't make a huge difference like that. Again, it's right ascension, and that's going to show you distance left and right, east and west, left and right. Oh my goodness. Well, how do we verify something like this? Well, let's go to Stellarium. And I put the time there. It was the same day that Benedict Cumberbatch was born. And we put it for 12 o'clock, regardless of whatever. Somebody was born at that time in London. And when I clicked to look for Pluto, here it is. I circled it. And here's east. It's looking easterly because it's coming up on the eastern horizon. All planets come up, they ascend from that side. And if we look at the information, it says azimuth altitude, but we're really going to be looking at the altitude part of this. All right. Now, in the next slide, I put the, you can't see it. So just in case, what I did is I decided to draw in the azimuthal grid. And the horizon is 0 degrees. And it goes in 5-degree increments. So you could see 5 degrees there, 10 degrees. I didn't go beyond that, but we could see that horizontally. And then there's other grids as well, but we're sticking with this horizontal just to show you the difference with the right ascension. And as you see, it's the same date and the same time and the same place. And remember, I talked to you about altitude. So Pluto's altitude at that time was almost 6 degrees above the horizon. And we can't see Pluto. Remember, Pluto is that it's at the very, very, very edges of our solar system. And it's something that we can't see. It's too small. The luminosity is not there. Our eyesight's not there. The atmosphere would get in the way. But I decided to break up this middle grid over here into like 1-degree sections. And I'm going to like zoom in a bit closer. And as you could see, close to that 6-degree mark, it's between the 5 and 6 degrees, we have Pluto there. And where is it? Above the horizon. So in that way, it means that we could go back to looking at the charts and the maps, right? And understanding which one really is the more accurate, more true method. It's in Mundo. When we create our software, we don't even develop it in Zodiacal. You do have that choice. Some people just want to read it that way. Why? Because the maps are a shorthand of our natal chart and the multitude of relocations that we could have all around the world. And we ask then, why was Pluto so different using both techniques? And we have to check the incline of Pluto along its orbit to the solar plane as well. And if you notice too, if we're using zodiacal technique, interestingly, it gives Pluto a southern declination. Pluto is really supposed to have a northern declination. It won't move to a southern declination for about another 20 years from today. So here's the inclination. Most of our planets are rotating on a solar plane of an 18-degree band. And from within that, Pluto is at this incline with its orbit because it is so far away from the sun. And if you look at Eris, it's even like at a more of an incline. And I wonder if that has to do with the fact that I didn't feel my Eris midheaven line. That's only 50 miles away from me. But I would say your mileage may vary. Go ahead and look for it. But essentially, we like to always look at these planets. Planets have planetary routines. They have reliable orbits for the most part. And asteroids do not. Dwarf planets often do not. And dwarf planets haven't cleared its orbit either. But I'm going to move on to Joseph's section, who's been patiently waiting. And if you are the brainy, smarty, analytical, and you want some of the maths, well, Joseph is going to hand it to you. To you, Joseph.
Thank you, Cindy. That was wonderful. All right. So also we'll be covering in, I should probably introduce myself. Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm the CEO of Astrology Geeks and the lead software engineer. What I mean by that is I'm the only guy that's doing it. So, when we say that, Meteor and AstroCloud Astrology Geeks is a project of love, it's literally just me and Cindy. Cindy has been gracious enough to teach me a lot and help me learn, and hand me books, and a lot of the mathematics and everything else is on me. So together we've been working together to bring you these techniques and share what we've learned along the way. Part of it is I know how to build an ephemeris, so I know what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's just start off from there. Okay, it's gonna get a little nerdy. All right, let's go. So go back one slide. So this is going to be touching off at first coordinate systems. Okay, we have to talk about this when we talk about astromapping, because in astrology, astromapping, astronomy, coordinate systems are everything. So let's go. And so astromapping techniques really utilize varying astronomical coordinate systems. Okay, and becoming familiar with astronomy, like just basic astronomy, will help you quickly understand how these astromapping techniques work. You want to know who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? And so in astrology and in everything really in anything, we chart everything on two mathematical coordinate systems. It's either going to be rectangular or polar. And rectangular and polar can be displayed as two-dimensional, representing three-dimensional information, and they can also be three-dimensional. Rectangular coordinates, for example, if you look at the left there, you see a box, you see your X and Y coordinates. Well, it can also include Z coordinates, and Z would be your distance, right? When we're talking about astrology, we're not just talking about, right ascension and declination. We're talking about, depth. We're talking about, as Cindy had touched on a little bit earlier, magnitude, right? So, that's what we're talking about is 3D space, right? In a rectangular projection. And that's generally how astronomy was projected in the beginning, and we convert it and put it into like polar, and we go back and forth between the two charting, and we do this a lot in astronomy, astrology, etc., astromapping as well. So moving on. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of just quickly show just how these projections and conversions work, right? Just a quick display that these is like when we chart something, we're displaying it the same way in two different charts. Okay. I wanted to share this wonderful quote. I found this during my research, and I thought this was wonderful. Since antiquity, people have observed the night sky. To establish order and predictability, people made maps of the heavens. Two kinds emerged. The first were star maps, organized into constellations, but focused on stellar location in the sky. Stars were placed in a coordinate system, initially based on celestial latitude and longitude, oriented to the ecliptic, but later based on declination and right ascension, oriented to the celestial equator. Over time, telescopic and scientific needs called for more detailed coordinate systems, and constellation images disappeared. This is a quote from Star and Solar System Maps, A History of Celestial Cartography by Nick Canis. And here is the link to the citation, iopscience.iop.org. And you can just see that little link down there. Give him a second to jot it down or take a screenshot. I recommend astrologers, read astronomy material. It's really important to be familiar with these terminologies. Let's keep going. So let's talk about an actual, like a literal astrocartography, right? Or what is an astromap? This is literally an astromap, right, guys? You probably have seen this before, don't really know what it's called, but this is more of a classical kind of star map. This is what he was referring to. This is the Cartesian rectangular star map, the Cartesian celestial map for short. There's a lot of different names for it. You can also look up the rectangular celestial map as well. There's no definitive name for it, but what it is this is, you've probably seen this familiar. It's a graph. It's a flat rectangular chart. And I want you to take note here. Actually, if we go back just a couple images, you'll see this line kind of going through. It's like a bendy, wavy line. If you follow it, it goes through the ecliptic. Okay, that's our ecliptic path, and you'll see the constellations labeled through there. So keep an eye on this pattern. Be mindful of this. We'll see this frequently when it comes to astromapping. And let's go back 2 slides forward. Yep. So you'll see it again here. Similar thing. It's charted, and so these are what Cartesian maps look like. Okay. What and why is this important? Well, we in astromapping have to essentially convert coordinates, right, from this projected space. And this is how that was plotted like in old times. When we're doing it mathematically, when we're building an ephemeris, we're plotting rectangular coordinates first before anything else. And here we are. This is what it looks like. Okay. We transform, right? Everything in astrology is about transformation, but we transform this data, right, back and forth between flat map to spherical. And this is important because there's different reference frames that we can use this for, okay? And be familiar with 2 different types of charting. Astrology is 3D, astromapping is 3D, not just a flat map. So, and then so when we take that projection of stars and wrap it around our great sphere, this great sphere or celestial sphere is not the Earth. It's just like a imaginary boundary around our Earth, right? Our projection. And so when we talk about things like right ascension and declination, okay, this is again to a reference frame. So right ascension to the reference point of reference is its point around the circle. Okay, it's a measurement around the circle, around the radius. Okay, and it's usually measured in hours. Okay, but we'll get to that. And declination is similar to like longitude, where it's height, right? And it can go all the way to the celestial North Pole and south, right? So when someone says right ascension of 0 hours, what they mean is 0 degrees, and we'll get to that here in a second. Actually, let's just go right to it. We'll just go right to it. So spherical coordinates, okay. So we just talked about rectangular coordinates. Now let's talk about polar coordinate systems in astromapping. Okay, these are called spherical coordinates, and these are going to be referred to as right ascension and declination. Right, Ra is what we'll call it for short, but you'll see it referred to as Ra. Right, and don't mistake it for the Egyptian god Ra, though. Okay. But actually, there was a lot of reference, or like there's actually a lot of inheritance from that. Oh, Cindy, we went forward a slide by accident. So right ascension is celestial longitude, right? We know what longitude is. It's east and west, right? And how far along this way, okay? It's like this. And right ascension, and declination is latitude. So again, up and down, right? And right ascension is east and west on the celestial sphere, and declination is north and south, right? Up, down, left, right. It's an easy way to look at it. These coordinates are fixed to the sky, so not to your reference frame. Okay, so the same star has like the same right ascension and declination for everyone on Earth, right? So that's irrelevant of your position on Earth. This is a celestial coordinate font on that reference plane, not your geospatial or like your local reference frame. And that position remains the same throughout the year. So right ascension varies from 0 to 24 hours, and declination varies from negative 90 degrees to positive 90 degrees. Okay. So just keep these little numbers in mind. When we're talking about right ascension, we're talking about hours, and 0 to 24, like a clock, right? That's what astrology is, like a 24-hour clock, right? You've heard that before. Declination, again, negative 90, positive 90. Okay. And it's just that's your range, right? And right ascension is going to be typically measured in hours, minutes, and seconds. However, it is easily converted into degrees for usage in computers. So if you're wondering why, how that works, it's, there's a conversion technique for it. There's a mathematical technique for it. But really what we're concerned about is just understanding some of the basics, because you'll hear someone say like, oh, at 18 hours, right? And you don't, you're like, oh, how's that? What does that mean? You can do a little math equation in your head, okay? The 0-hour mark of right ascension is the vernal equinox. That's our in a geocentric reference frame. Okay, so be mindful here that right ascension, right? This, like in a heliocentric point of view, Earth would also have a right ascension, right? All the planets have right ascension, but here on a geocentric point of frame, like on Earth's point of view, right ascension is going to be measured from the vernal equinox, 0 degrees Aries. So when we say 0-hour right ascension, from Earth's point of view, we're saying 0 degrees Aries, vernal equinox. Okay. And declination, again, is -90 to +90, but the ecliptic boundary on Earth in our reference frame is going to be roughly about 23 degrees of declination. So you really typically won't see planets go too far out of that, but they do. And again, so you could see that how it's measured in hours, and you can see here in the little drawing here on the left, right ascension at the 0-hour mark with the picture of Aries, the ram, or the symbol, vernal equinox. And as you go on, boom, 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 it's measured in hours, right? And that's how you can start to see where we can start plotting this here to a 3D perspective. And on the image on the right, it's really interesting. You can see, again, vernal equinox, 0 hours right ascension, right? That's our measuring point. And then all the way to the right, you follow it, and it says Betelgeuse is at a right ascension of 5 hours, 55 minutes. And then he's just barely 7 degrees in declination. So he's plotted up there very slightly. This is a shorthand way of showing you when you look at like software like Cindy had just presented earlier, you're seeing that projection on your local horizon, right? All right. So when we, refer to right ascension in hours, we're saying, 0 hours is 0 degrees, right? So 12 hours, right, would be 0 degrees Libra. 6 hours is Cancer, 0 degrees Cancer, and 18 hours is 0 degrees Capricorn, right? Super simple, easy way to look at it. Another way that we're translating it to is degrees. And so when we say right ascension at 0 hours, next slide, please, we're saying 0 degrees, right? 90 degrees, 180, right? So when we say 12 hours is 180, right? And 18 hours, 270. There's a simple trick to it. It's just times 15, okay? Take the hours times 15, and there you have degrees, okay? So that's an easy shorthand way of trying to look between degrees and hours. You'll see this used interchangeably. Don't get confused. Okay. So you're probably familiar with a Cartesian map, like an AstroMap like this, right? And this is a simple explanation of how, astrocartography is part of this Cartesian coordinate system and how we're projecting spherical coordinates on a Cartesian map. That's what astromapping, that's what we're doing with astromapping, right? We're transforming that planetary information into a, between circular and rectangular. And this is an easy way for us to look at it. All right, next slide. So astrocartography utilizes, I didn't say it utilizes right ascension and declination and converts spherical coordinates to rectangular and then plots it onto the world map. Super simple. That's all we're doing with astrocartography, really, right? That's astronomy for astromapping. That's understanding what it is that we're doing in the shorthand way. So when someone asks you, what is astrocartography? You can tell them, I am translating spherical coordinates to a rectangular map. And then people will just understand, will just look at you and be a little blinded because you know what you're talking about now. So polar coordinate systems and astromapping continued. There's more. We don't just use right ascension and declination. We use other coordinate systems. Okay, we use as much as we really can, right? Because these are the coordinate systems that are used in astronomy. Okay, so horizontal coordinates or horizontal. That I can't do it. I can't do it, Cindy. I can't say horizontal. I can't. um, Horizontal coordinates, altitude and azimuth. All right. Altitude is the angle between the horizon and an object, right? And azimuth is the bearing of the object from true north. Simple definitions. Altitude of an object can range from 0 to plus minus 90, just like declination. And azimuth ranges from 0 to 360 degrees, just like right ascension. The altitude and azimuth of a star change as it moves across the sky in horizontal coordinates, unlike right ascension declination.
And for the record, it's horizontal.
I can't English. I've had a long week. And stop me if I talk too fast because I can run a million miles. I have a Mercury in Aquarius and it's retrograde and it's conjunct the sun, and you know that just is. I can be like,
so see what you're doing, and they could always play back.
So, all right, altitude at positive 90 degrees is the zenith. Simple way of remembering this, okay? And azimuth at 0 degrees is true north. So some simple little factoids you can remember in your mind. Zenith, 90 degrees, azimuth, 0 north, okay? And another way you can look at it is like this. And Cindy touched on this earlier, 0 degrees altitude is you looking flat, and that is the infinite horizon, okay? So that is the horizon that you are flat at, right? And if you look up, like she said, that is your zenith. That is 90 degrees. So if you can try in your mind to divide that by 3, you might be able to have a easier understanding of where to point in the sky. It's really not that hard. I look at the sky all the time. All right. So altitude and azimuth are essentially geospatial. And I'm going to define this. You're going to hear me use this term a lot. Geospatial is defined, okay, it's relative to geography, and it comes from the word geo, meaning earth, and spatial, meaning, well, space or space around you. Another way of it translates is to local space. So it's actually another way of translating it. And it literally defines to as data, okay, data relating to a particular location. Okay, so that's all we're saying when we refer to geospatial. We're referring to data or information that's relative to your location. Okay, and so, and here's a good look here of what altitude azimuth is as geospatial. What geospatial really means. You're the guy, you're the observer, and you got the telescope. Okay, and you're sitting there in the center. Okay, and there you can see azimuth around you. It's the compass laid around you, north, south, east, west. That is your 360-degree azimuth, okay? And you'll watch from the east to the west, the planetary altitude go up and down. And when it reaches that middle point, that's its transit. Okay, so this is just a visual way of describing what we're doing. Rise, transit, and set. That's what altitude does in geospatial location. Okay, and the higher the altitude, right, that 90 degrees, the more likely the closer it is to the zenith, right? And just a little tip and trick. I don't know if you guys know this, but the right ascension of the midheaven is actually your sidereal time. So didn't know if you knew that. So geospatial data is utilized in local space astrology. And I say utilized because we use a lot of stuff. I mean, we use everything, right? Good examples of geospatial data utilized in local space would be compass astrology, right? It utilizes both altitude and azimuth. And because azimuth is measured from 0 to 360 degrees, a special phenomena occurs in 3D astrology, and this is called geospatial planetary aspects. Okay, just like in the ecliptic, planets making aspects to each other because it's 360 degrees in a wheel, they can also happen in the area around you. Okay, And so where right ascension doesn't change, right? When you relocate your chart, you relocate and you see on the ecliptic chart, right? Your natal chart, it doesn't change except for it just rotates the wheel. But when we look at it from an azimuthal point of view, planetary positions change. Yes, and Tamira at Kepler, she teaches this in her compass astrology class. Cindy, will you chime in? You know more about this.
She'll offer local space in the summer. I believe she offers it 5 weeks of part 1 and 5 weeks of part 2.
Yeah, so look for her classes on this subject. She will go way more in depth onto geospatial planetary aspects. But this is why the phenomenon exists, is because the azimuth is 360 degrees. And then another calculation that utilizes geospatial data is going to be planetary ascensions. And that one uses altitude only. Okay, let's move on. So this is a 3-dimensional compass on my software. It is available through AstroCloud and Meteor. Meteor is a part of AstroCloud. It's a part of AstroloGeeks. I know it's convoluted. It sounds convoluted, but really it's pretty simple. AstroloGeeks is my platform and AstroCloud is our product. And Meteor is a feature of AstroCloud that allows us to, it's all part of the AstroMapping stuff. So if you want the AstroMapping stuff, go for Meteor. That's the extension. You just need the free version of AstroCloud. So you don't need to purchase anything it's great. So I won't bide you and confuse you, but I wanted to explain what Meteor was in case some of you guys were asking. Meteor and AstroCloud are together. They're a part of each other. Just like, me and Cindy, our friendship, we're a part of, we're a team, right? And just like this software, it's a team software. Meteor enhances AstroCloud because it gives us these, this is our deal. Me and Cindy's creation here is this AstroMapping stuff. And this compass I'm super proud of. This is a 3-dimensional compass, and it's actually on the software. It utilizes your actual device compass header. So it's a real compass. It actually aligns with the north, south, east, west axis. But if your device doesn't have a compass, don't worry, it'll just align like this, right? Like my laptop here. And this compass is 3-dimensional. And if you really look at it, you can see, okay, at the top, true north, 0, and it shows you the azimuth in degrees. And you can see here a lot of things about this compass, like, okay, we can see that the planets are around the circle, and you can see that the closer that they are to the center point, okay, that center point is actually our zenith, okay? So this dome represents the sky above you in your local space. So the dotted lines are the planets below, and the straight lines are the planets above. And so the closer the planets are to the center, the closer they are to the zenith, and the closer they are to the edge of the ring, that is the closer they are to the horizon. That's like our shorthand way of looking at this compass, right? This is a 3-dimensional view plotted in a 2-dimensional circle. Okay. Next slide, please.
You might want to add, Joseph, that astromapping, the most elevated and the least elevated planets and how important they are. So if a planet is the highest at being visually seen, that's like seeing the top of a skyscraper as a landmark. And the ones that are closest to the horizon are also super important too, because it could represent what's coming to you or what you've already gone through and what's passing, what's going to be setting below the horizon. And I wanted to add that in the class, something really exciting. This looks complicated, but it's not. We're actually going to be hand drawing this together. Step by step, we'll take you along the way. And a lot of the class is, well, not a lot of it, but there are parts of the class where we are drawing things step by step just so we could get that kinetic function and have it committed to memory without you actually having to hope it sinks in. It will be synced in by the end of class.
Yes. Yes. Okay, cool. Thank you, Cindy. And so continuing on, so this image here is just basically describing how that projection works, right? When you're looking at that compass from the top down, what we're really seeing is what had Cindy referred to as that dome, right? So this dome is like you're at the center and it's the area above you, right? And so that's how we're looking. See how it's 3D, right? That perspective change from top to side, right? It's really, that's what we're looking at, right? That flat and then it's like a little dome on top. So that's how we're going to read the compass. I think I just saw someone just ask remediation of what. So I think Cindy just mentioned geospatial aspects are part of the remediation course, like astro remediation. So like it's an idea that you can change your that location has a lot to do with your experience. And actually, let's just touch on that now. Let's just touch on that now. Let's just do that now. So here is a geospatial aspect compass. So just like before, I just showed you a three-dimensional compass. This is a aspect compass. This is a two-dimensional compass. So this compass, it's flipped. You'll see east and west are inverted, but it's the same information. Okay. And what we see here is in where I was born. Okay, this is my natal chart, but this is the geospatial aspects of where I was born. So one thing I didn't know until looking at this was I didn't know that where I was born, I had a sun square Uranus. But I'm also really excited to see that where I'm at here, I have that Mars trine Saturn and Mercury sextile Saturn. I didn't know I had that Mercury sextile Saturn. Now I do know I have Mars trine Saturn in my ecliptic chart. But when I see a aspect repeated in the geospatial aspects, I know that is a stronger aspect or a stronger manifestation, a stronger energy, right? Or what we call mirrored aspects, or even aspects that are just repeated, right? So this tells a different story about the location. When I relocated to Miami, I don't know if I put on this slide. If not, it's okay. All these aspects go away, and it literally goes down to a single sextile between Venus and Pluto, and like that's it in the relocation. So it changes the story, and I feel like this really strong pull to Miami, and it's like very Plutonian. It's like so seductive. And that could explain why I feel so inclined, and why it's so like why I love it so much, why there's such a deep pull there. In why here I feel like there's a lot more chaos, right? So that's kind of what astro remediation tells is, in compass astrology, that the azimuth changes, right? The planetary azimuth, your natal planets change across the azimuth when we relocate the chart. So Tamira will teach this, and we show this in all of our astromapping courses. So, all right, let's move forward. And again, this touches on the perspective thing, right? So aspects change on geospatial position. Okay. So moving forward.
It's the only time that you could actually change your aspects between planets. So remember, we also showed you about if you're up north at the North Pole, you're going to have to look straight up, and that's where you'll see Polaris. And that makes kind of like a 90-degree angle to the horizon. But if you're at the equator, it would be conjunct the horizon. So imagine just your local space changes everything.
Okay. Yes. And so and not just the azimuth, we've talked a little bit about the aspects and azimuth and how important that is. I'm sure everyone is like looking it up right now. Geospatial aspects are totally game changing, totally. But you know what? There's something else. Altitude matters. And I found this wonderful quote, and because I felt like it fits the theme about what we're about to discuss here. Attitude determines your altitude. Okay. If you have a bad attitude, even if you are way up there, you'll come crashing down. And if you're still trying to take off, a bad attitude will keep you on the ground, revving your engines, but going nowhere. Keep this in mind, because we're kind of, this quote talks about, it's beautiful in the sense that it's talking about forces like inertia and motion. So just keep that in mind. So let me introduce to you one of my favorite subjects. It's in astromapping, a simple one, geospatial planetary ascensions. All right. And this is a calculation that is, it uses time. Okay. So we have to look at time. Okay. And that's what all of what we're doing, right? Is time telling, right? That's what astrology is. So here's our geospatial ascensions for today. And right now it's about 3:26 my time. So we are about somewhere with Uranus having the highest altitude in my local space. So this is for me, my area, like Westminster, Colorado for today. Okay, so this is what an ascensional chart will look like, and we just got this up and running in Meteor over the past few days, just so that we can get this ready for teaching you guys and showing you guys how to use this in the course. So you will be able to use this right away when we start teaching. And you can see, we're going to teach you how to read this. There's a lot of phenomenon you can read just from these charts. Just like in the compass chart, you can see different phenomenon there. You'll be able to see different phenomenon here. And we'll kind of point out those nuances. It's a really simple trick. You'll be able to walk away from this course knowing how to read this chart for sure. So let's kind of go to actually, if you go back, Cindy, today, right before right when we got started and got everything going, Moon and Mars had crossed. So Moon's the white line and Mars is the red line, and they had their crossing. And so I found that interesting. We're going to point out why that's significant here in just a moment. Okay, but that happened right before we started. So I like to liken ascensions. Cindy actually kind of pointed this out because she was noticing this is how it kind of works. It's a lot like a roller coaster. You know what I mean? You have your pushes and your pulls, right? It's kind of like you think of it like this. Just because you have a pot of water sitting on the stove, and just because you turn it on to high, doesn't mean that the water is going to be boiling right then and there. It's got to have some momentum, right? So, next slide.
Wait.
It's a lot like this image.
Go
ahead, Cindy.
The roller coaster, it's like a chug, a chug, a chug, a chug. And once you get to the top, it feels like there's a slight standstill. And then whoosh, all the energy comes. And you'll find this too with the planetary ascensions. A buildup of energies, it finally peaks, and then the manifestations of it come. So you might want to plan, say, Venusian things after, the peak. Or you might want to take your time on it, depending on your goals. But go back, Joseph.
Yeah. So it really is a lot like this. It runs all day, planets going up and down. Okay. Except for being a train of cars going on the same track. It's multiple tracks, and they have their own different tracks, going up and down, and it's this individual cart on each one. Okay. So that's really what it's like. And unlike azimuth, altitude cannot produce aspects. Okay. And I've heard some astrologers say mistakenly that, they'll get altitude aspects. I don't know how that works, but that's because it doesn't work in a 360-degree circle. It's only, plus 90, negative 90. So we can see altitudinal crossings. Okay. Geospatial ascensions show us what's the degrees of the planet as they're rising and setting at the same time. Okay. So this is not a natal chart, but this is the day that I was born. And January 25th, 1989, I was born. Oh, one slide previous, Cindy. One slide previous. Sorry. We went forward. So I was born at about 11:23 p.m. Okay. And so I was able to get about 11:20. And you can see there, I pointed at Moon, right? We can see that Moon, Mars, and Jupiter are above the horizon. Jupiter is going to be green. And if you guys get lost, there's a little label. Take a second, okay? These are the colors we chose for it. Later, I'll add a color picker, but for now, these are the colors we chose. So I can see that these planets are above the horizon. And kind of like we had said before, next slide, just because the pot of, you turned on the heat doesn't mean that the water is boiling. Okay. So I was born about half an hour, about 33 minutes after this Moon Mars crossing. Okay. Moon is like the mother, right? And Mars, well, what do you think Mars is? I was born of a C-section. Okay. So this is about the time that we were going under the knife. And my mother, she tried to have me, and I was too big to push. And so they had to do the emergency cesarean, and there we go. And what is Mars, right? Mars is moons, or Phobos and Deimos. It's panic, right? And fear. That's emergency, right? And Mars is invasive. Mars is the knife. Mars is blood, right? And the moon is the mother, right? The bearing of a child. It's such a very simple thing, but it doesn't mean that that crossing is going to be the moment that I was born per se, but that's a good timing because my birth was recorded about 33 minutes after that crossing occurred in our local space.
That's when the decision was made to give your mom the C-section. You did it pretty quickly. And like moon is mother, and male, you happen to be born a boy, so as Mars, right? So
yeah.
So if we have just under 15 minutes left, and you have 15 slides left, so
let's go. All right, so I strongly refer. We're going to touch on some things we touched about on our last presentation, which was the exploring Amelia Earhart's legacy through astromapping. I have to go back to some of this information because when we did that, I ran out of time there too, and I can't do this. I have to. I need more time. And I didn't have this calculation up and ready for the presentation, but I did make some notes. And so I'm ready to tackle this back and share some new research about the Amelia Earhart information we have. So touching back, if you guys are interested, this is Amelia Earhart's natal compass. In that video, we talked about how that Uranus-Saturn conjunction had a lot to do with, like it pointed where she had her final destination. When we go there, those two planets had the highest altitude. And so if you want to go back, this is the compass, there's her birth information. I strongly recommend you go watch that video and then come back to this, but I'm going to try and refresh you guys and try to catch you guys all up. Okay. So Amelia, where she was born at, what we didn't get to see as a part of the picture, okay, was that when, where she was born, she had Jupiter and Mars in a conjunction geospatially, and it was square, right? This Pluto and moon, right? And you can see how, Jupiter rules aviation, right? And Mars is the men that we were talking about that may have been obstructive or not so necessarily helpful, right? She even flew with the man and she had a man as her co-pilot, on her final destination. And so, that shows us a little tale of the story that we really didn't get to see when talking about that. Layers, okay, that astromapping can give us with these new techniques. But let's start to go in around altitude because we have a story to tell with altitude, okay? So on her last day that she departed, this was July 2nd, 1937, okay, guys? And after she departed around it would have been 2 a.m. local time in Howland Island, around the area that she had departed. Okay. So it says that on that same day, around 3 p.m., Earhart reported her altitude and that they would reduce altitude due to thick clouds. But around 5 p.m., Earhart reported her altitude. And during her approach to Howard Island, the Itasca received strong, clear voice transmissions for Earhart, identifying as KHAQQ, but she was unable to hear voice transmissions from the ship. So around 5 p.m., that's when trouble starts brewing. Remember we said the crossing happens, but you don't see it immediately? Well, we have our first major crossing around 4:30, around this time, between 3 and 5, as stated here on the Wikipedia. 4:30 was when Saturn rose in Howland Island in that geospatial location. Okay, so there's our first sign of trouble, right? But we don't really know. And at 6:14, another call was received stating that the aircraft was within 200 miles. And, they were requesting that the ship use its direction finder to provide a bearing for the craft. And Earhart began whistling into the microphone. I can't whistle, as a continuous signal for the ship's crew to use. At this point, the radio operators on Itasca realized their system could not tune into the aircraft signal, and the radio man later commented that he was sitting there, quote, sweating blood, because he couldn't do a darn thing about it. So let's take a look at around this 6 p.m. time and 6:45 time, and what we have is at around 6:10 p.m., is that in between time. And this shows us here Pluto's at the IC at the very bottom. Okay. And there's our major trouble, right? There's some real problems. And if we look above the horizon, we can see that this occurs after Mars and Saturn, the malefics, had their crossings. And Jupiter had just reached his IC, or his midheaven transit. He had just reached his transit time. And so the roller coaster for Jupiter, who rules aviation, it's on the downslope, right? And Jupiter's retrograde at this time. So go back to that video. We show you all the astrology on this. I have to just kind of zip by this again. Altitude, right? And we can see when I showed you guys in that video, the sky live. If you want to see a free like 3D projection of the sky around you, this is a free web app. Anywho, so I showed in there Saturn's altitude, that it was like the highest point. It was above the moon, and you can see, I'm trying to show here that altitude is from down up. Okay. You can't see the whole dome, but this is the time you need to enter, okay, for it. And it's 8:43 local time, it's 3:45 UTC, okay, or whatever. July 2nd, 1937, last transmission from Amelia Earhart. Saturn had the highest altitude at the time that this occurred. We can see this same 3D projection on the Geospatial Ascensions map. And here is the time of the last transmission. And it had occurred after Moon and Jupiter had their crossing. Again, Moon's on the way up, Jupiter's on the way down, and Saturn is at the top. And he's climbing, and he remains dominant for the rest of the time. They were lost. There's obstruction. It's problems at this point. Saturn wins. Okay, Saturn's got a bad altitude. And here, just take a look at that incline. Over time, Saturn wins. And Saturn's perfectly symbolic of time, right? Saturn represents time. It's called Chronos, right? So time was not on her side. But the more that time went on, the more that they were likely to run into loss of fuel and, well, perish. And so planetary distance matters, okay? Another thing that we had talked about in that video, we had talked about planetary distance. I'd shown you guys how we use an orrery chart to show planetary distance. I had mentioned that orrery charts were the easiest way visually for us to see planetary distance, okay? We'll be providing you our new orrery chart so that way you guys can see this planetary distance in a 3D spatial point of view. Cindy, next slide, please. This is a video. So we'll teach you in this course how to consider planetary distance because, it's about perspective, right? And there is a way to read this orrery. This is the day of Amelia Earhart's final transmission. And we had mentioned that on this day, Mercury was behind the sun. So communication was obstructed on this particular day. And Mars was closer to the Earth in its orbit than it would be at other times. So Mars was particularly more malefic as well. So here's how I will be also in the course. We have a shorthand way of showing you. So if you have difficulty, you're not certain about understanding planetary distance, I've incorporated modules into the software when we teach you. It shows you a very simplistic way of seeing planetary distance. Here we can see on that day, Venus was kind of close, but not that close, right? Mars, we can see like we had seen in the orrery here, visually, it's perigee. It's very close to Earth. And so I've created a meter that helps us understand this because when we talk about planetary magnitude, it's so important to understand when Mars is closer, when it's further away, because we're talking about it either being behind the sun or being really close to Earth. That kind of matters. As well as I've also noticed that geospatially, aspects that occur like conjunctions and oppositions are even more potent, especially when they occur geospatially. Okay. So, and if you guys were curious about Saturn and Amelia's chart, it really wasn't far or close, but it still won at the end of the day, right? Okay, I think that's our final slide. So, all right. techniques you're going to be learning from our course. We promise we're not going to, like, you will walk out of this course being able to shorthand read an orrery chart. It's not as complex as it sounds. It's actually fairly easy for us to understand, and it's very, very useful. Okay, you can use any orrery chart, not just ours, but any orrery chart to when you'll be walking away from that class knowing how to read one. And how to consider planetary distance, thanks to either orrery or, whatever meter we use. You're going to need you'll start understanding why planetary distance matters and learn how to incorporate that in your interpretations. And you'll learn how to read and understand planetary ascensions. So that's what we're going to offer you through this course as simple little takeaways that you can learn. So benefits as well is that we're going to try and make it simplified. We're not going to overcomplicate it and drag it out. We're just going to make it simplified enough that you could begin using these techniques right away, and you'll be able to, easy peasy remember it. And students will gain free access to our software, AstroCloud and Meteor, for the 2 months that, the course will be shorter than 2 months, but for 2 months, so that way you guys can practice and have something to use right away to learn. So that way you guys are able to get right into it and can practice right away.
As they say, less is more. But we're going to be teaching you more than just those techniques as well, like how to plot a local space map by hand, and a lot of definitions and determining the differences between, like I said, the declination, right ascension. So you're really going to enjoy the course. It does require live attendance. You could get a recording, but you have to be there live. We just asked to see you on camera once, because we're going to recognize if you could keep it on the whole time. Really, ideally, we could recognize if you're having a hard time, or you could just pull up whatever it is you're plotting and say, what did I do wrong here? And identify it. But by the end of each class, essentially, pretty much go and learn it without having to read way too much and trying to rote memorization with it. Well, I don't know how we made it on time to the end of our presentation. I'm going to stop share there. And if we do need to go back to the slides, because I have not been looking at the questions, but Lori, was there anything that people had asked or wanted to know more about?
Yeah. We have quite a few questions. So let's get into it. Okay. So the first question is about the orbs of influence, and when is a line too far away?
Oh, it really depends on what planet. So with the sun, it sounds really, really, really crazy. But there's this period it's around the second week or so of July, that the orb of the sun midheaven in particular, I'm not kidding you, could be, and if you're at the latitude of what the ecliptic is, 6,250 miles is that orb. That's crazy, right? But if we're in the winter, it's going to be much smaller. And the more north or south we go, it's going to be even less. So it really varies planet to planet. It also depends on the phase as well, because if you're at a half moon, you're born with your natal moon at half, or a crescent or something, anything less than half a moon, that's going to have less orb than a full moon. And if it's a harvest full moon, it would have a wider orb than if it was a moon that was far away in apogee. It really depends. It is so personalized. That's why you could hear some people talking about they went to their Jupiter line, but they didn't really feel so lucky. And maybe Jupiter was far, or maybe it was behind the sun. And yeah, it's Jupiter on the midheaven, but at the same time, it's obstructed by, the forces of the sun. So there's no one answer for that. But when Jim Lewis did the technique, and he varied on his orbs according to line, and finally it kind of became standardized 350 miles east or west. So if you feel that your energies vary, that's the reason. The reason I just gave is why.
Thank you. Excellent. The next question, this comes up often. If you live on a line and the planet in your chart is in detriment or fall, tell
Ah.
us about that.
Well, Lori, you're my favorite co-teacher with this because a Libra, Lori is a Libra. The sun is in fall in Libra. Therefore, do we tell Libras never to go to their sun line? I always like to say, take that and put it on the side. So no, we don't look at that and especially not when you're relocating the chart. Because the way, I don't know, it's just the internet age that we're in. People say, just relocate the natal and read the relocated chart as if it's a new natal. And that's the wrong way to do it. As you take this astrology for astromapping, astronomy for astromapping course, you'll start to really, these are kind of eureka points that you'll get to. But of course, through all the courses, you'll find that out too, especially AM 100. I describe that as well. Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, and I've taken that class, and what I love about the class is that you learn about the mundane definitions in addition to the definitions that you're already familiar with, and it does help you kind of interpret those lines for yourself and your clients. Okay, this question is about if there are any. Now, Ricardo asked about the best book. I'm going to say, are there any books on astromapping, mathematics, and calculations? Do they even exist?
Oh, you know what? Let me put it this way. No, they are. We'd be lucky to find books on astro mapping in the way that we're talking about it. Your best bet is to go to the source itself, go to NASA, go to Wikipedia, and get the mathematics and study the astronomy. It's all publicly available. All the mathematics for everything we do is really publicly available by NASA. The mathematics have been worked out. I mean, you can look up anything. You want to learn the Keplerian orbital elements, go for it. You want to learn how to you calculate the house systems, those mathematical formulas are published. So there's a lot of stuff you can get for free. Books, there are books on programming, not books on mathematics per se. I have seen some. I would have to come back to you and like dig around my library. I like no joke have like a massive library of books of like astrology, everything, and all sorts of stuff. So what I recommend is that if you want to know the math, just get into astronomy, go and look up the equations for anything astronomy equations, and you're going to be down a very painful, fun rabbit hole. It hurts. It hurts to do a lot of math.
Yes.
Years to get to for my research. And, professionally, I was a researcher at some point. This is the various sources I've gone to, mathematics books, architecture books, of course, astronomy books. I mean, there were so many different areas that I had to grab from, and actually people as well, like people that were architects that talked to me about shading, for instance, and like the arc of shades. And I was like, oh, this kind of matches with like how a planet would move in the sky. But you know what? There's an idea for a book for us, Joseph.
Gonna have to at some point, because the one thing I have to strongly encourage is it's a good question. That's probably one of the better questions I've heard in a long time is how do you calculate? Because astrologers used to, for the up until the modern era, used to know how to do the calculations. Every astrologer knew how to generate an ephemeris or do the mathematics themselves, and it would be painstaking long time, and they'd have to do the math. But astrologers that's who we used to be, and if we don't maintain that art, we could lose it. So please pick it up.
Yeah. We have a 10-week chart calculation course, which is required if you get a diploma at Kepler College, for that reason that computers have taken the place of hand calculation, but it's still important to know how to do it.
Yeah. And it's going to be important to know that, like, as humanity as a whole, knowing how to generate an ephemerides and knowing how to work with the space mathematics is going to be important in case, something like a foreign object comes in and causes a perturbation in our planetary resonance. What I mean by that is something comes in and hits a planet big enough that it affects its orbit, that it affects all the other orbits of our planets. And we'd have to generate a whole new ephemerides, and we'd have to attune or account for that. And so, if let's say we have a doomsday scenario and we're able to pick up one day, we should definitely make sure we don't lose that information. So the more that people practice it, the better, I think.
Yep. Okay, next question. So this one is about how software programs calculate. So Macarena says some work with the real location of the planet from the Earth's point of view, like astro.com, and others use the projected location of the planet on the ecliptic. What's the difference, and when would you use one or the other?
I will answer this one. So what you're asking is the difference between astrometric and apparent positions. Okay. And apparent positions are those on the ecliptic. And there is we'd mentioned earlier, okay, the ecliptic is going to be accounts for light bending and all sorts of phenomena that occurs here on the Earth. Meanwhile, right ascension of the planet, right, in an astrometric point of view, is going to ignore that phenomena. It's going to be the quote true position. Let me put it like this: the Earth, the sun is 8 minutes light time away from the Earth. Okay, so the sun apparently appears a certain way when we're here by the time the light reaches our eyes. But its astrometric position is going to be 8 space minutes or time minutes ahead. Okay, so there's going to be this deflection or this difference in time. So when is the question? When is it appropriate to use? I say right ascension or astrometric observations are the most important. That's where the planet truly is, regardless of how long it takes for the light to hit your eyes. That's what I like to use. But if you want to use, ecliptic positions or apparent positions, I guess that's up to you to study. One thing I do want to make an important point about is try not to be too hyped up on the positions or the precision. Okay. I know astrologers get really hung up on precision about, the astromapping or about the planetary positions of the planets in the sky. But to be fair and to be honest, okay, there's a looseness and accuracy of the positions of the planets, and the best data you're going to get is going to be from JPL, and the secondary best of that is going to be orbital elements. Okay, and these positions are about as accurate as they can get. But when you change positions between ephemerides, if you want, if you really want to be a harken on position and accuracy, you'd want to be focusing on JPL. And again, it's only scoped to a finite amount of time. You got to know which JPL to use, and it takes an advanced, amount of knowledge to know what ephemerides to reference from. I say most astrology programs are fine. So just whatever, if you prefer to try the two, I like astrometric or right ascension declination, not apparent. That's what I like to use.
I'm going to talk through a bunch of the rest of these questions in rapid fire so that everybody has a chance to get, some questions answered. So a lot of one-liners coming up. Andrea Pepper, are relocated charts just a different way of reading the same information as astrocartography or astromapping? Not exactly. The astromapping charts are the shorthand, and then you find more details in the radial charts. And then, you really should look at the sheets and other things like declination, etc. Lori Mahwini is asking, if a line is on your midheaven, is it also poking at your IC? And then she goes, AC, DC? Well, the great circles, the MCIC is the same, and then ACDC is the same. But if you're looking at a planet on an angle and you've been to that planetary line on a different angle, look at that experience, because it's a planetary energy and the angle is where it's going to manifest in your life. So the midheaven is going to affect your career, which then affects your home life, for instance. And then you'll feel it in your personal relationships and the way you approach the world. Lori, again, is asking, could you please touch on the benefit of a relocated solar return chart? We didn't talk about relocated solar return charts in this presentation, but I just finished a solar return chart class with Chu Yap, who's magnificent. When she offers it again, I highly suggest that you take it. I've traveled so much, and she told me, go with your natal, and she was right. Because it's you, it's the snapshot of you that you carry, your geotag. Nikki Dyer asked, when do you use zodiacal maps over Inmundo maps? When I'm teaching or doing a presentation, just like I did right now. I don't ever use them for readings. Macarena O.T.
Oh, you know what, Cindy? There's a few people who asked that question. So just to be clear, you only use Inmundo with client work, not zodiacal. You only use zodiacal for explaining the difference because software has both of those options. I think most of them do, if not all of them. So just want to be clear with that one.
Yeah, and someone asked if Astro uses Inmundo or zodiacal. They use Inmundo, and AstroSeek uses only zodiacal. And then all the other astronomy or astro cartography, whatever, astromapping software I've seen uses both. With and us, we only use Inmundo as well. Macarena is also asking, is it possible with this technique to view the map and see where a planetary conjunction will affect more directly, like a planetary cycle such as Saturn-Jupiter? Is it possible to see which countries in the world would have it more intense? I'm not sure how to, let me get back to you on that question because it's kind of, I have to think about what you're really asking there. And you're also asking, will Inmundo work to study planetary conjunctions all over the world then? Zodiacal will work for a natal chart because it's using the ascendant circle as a reference. I would say just try to blend them. And I mean, sometimes there's no trick where you just look at both in a glance and go, you'd actually have to kind of go into those. Joel Andrew is asking, what are your opinions on the significance of relocating the solar return charts? We kind of already touched on that. I mean, I've tried it after, and I think natal, relocating your natal. Going with the natal solar return, no matter where in the world you are, is the way to go, Joel. Marlene Stalker is asking, is Cindy suggesting when we look at astrolocation software, we should check whether there's zodiacal or Inmundo is more accurate? Definitely Inmundo is more accurate. And just about all the software out there has both features, the one that you could buy. The only one that has only zodiacal is AstroSeek, the free one that's online. Marlene is also asking, in the first part of the talk, Cindy said she moved her desk to off of her Jupiter line. Where did she move it? I wanted to move it to my Saturn line, but that was in my bathroom. I couldn't do readings from there, and it would make sense to lose weight from your Saturn line. I ended up moving it somewhere, I think, between my Pluto and my Mercury for the body transformation. And let me tell you, it did not take 3 months to remove the 18 pounds that came on in those quick 3 months. Audrey Gerbhardt, she said, Joseph, can you help find the exact place where Amelia went down, as they have been looking for her remains and her plane for many years? That, I think, is a mystery. I'll let you get back to that, Joseph, because I want to get to the rest of these rapid fire questions. Elizabeth Martinez, how often is the class going to be offered with Kepler? We're aiming for twice a year. Carolina Star, Laura, Lori, thanks for being a trooper with keeping up, like marking these. Carolina Stara, is this similar to when Bernadette Brady does as she reads the real sky, meaning that she reads the real position? I don't know what Bernadette Brady does, but I hear from everybody how much of a whiz and brilliant and amazing she is. I would think so, because she also does a cultural astronomy where she's talking about go outside, look at the sky. So I would say yes, just speculating. Karen, where does destination fit in with these positional message? Karen McCauley. I'll let Joseph answer that because I can't do it too quickly. And then Susan Aram, can you please address about all these incoming earthquakes and volcanoes that are incoming daily? Your opinion matters to me. I would say use a geodetic chart, and Ralph McIntyre is offering a geodetic class, as a matter of fact. And that's part of the AstroMapping course. So I'm just going to go back and forth in weird order here. Audria was asking Joseph, can you answer in like 1 or 2 lines? Could you essentially find out where Amelia went down using the AstroMapping?
So, I want to say essentially you can find a lot of things using the AstroMapping. I think what we did is if you got to go and watch our Titanic video that we did with Kepler a few months back, and we had shown with the combination of astrocartography and local space, we were able to see using the Titanic's maiden voyage chart, we were able to see its local space and its astrocartography literally made like a box at which it was just where the area that it was discovered. So if we had that information, let's say before the Titanic was discovered, and was found, we could have been able to say, oh yeah, that's, we could have taken credit for that. That would have been a pinpoint like location. As far as finding Amelia is concerned, I think that and it's a per chart thing. It's not like you're going to like look at the chart and it's going to be like, aha, there's that box, every time. It's going to be like, you're going to have to look for nuances. Like I think in Amelia's case, like there was Saturn in, with the highest altitude at the destination that she was trying to, reach. And I think that from there, it's just blocked. So, worst case scenario, you can assume that she would have been in the region that, and I think I remember we had seen some other lines, right, Lori? Right, Cindy, we had seen some other lines that were pretty close to Howland Island. So you'll have to like kind of like use information research. You have to piece it together to kind of when it comes to historical bits to try and glean more information as to like find where a final destination is. Amelia Earhart's a famous we don't know where she went kind of thing, and it would be one of those things where at this point it would be long gone and lost anyway.
Let's get to other questions. Back to Macarena with his question. I understand what you're saying now. So you're talking about planetary cycles. There's 2 different ways to do it, or a few different ways actually. There's cyclocartography, which is transiting the outer planets and progressing the inner planets. And I think Mars was part of the outer planets, but you could use that. You could transit the current lines, or you could transit your natal lines, and they're all different techniques. So yes, to your question about looking at where a Saturn-Pluto conjunction would be the tightest. Marlene was asking, can you please explain the aspects change? We already covered that in the presentation. So the really more poignant thing is to look at like the perspective of the guy crushing heads, or perspective sculptures, and what Joseph had explained in his bit. Haley Terrell says, do you consider out of bounds as a planetary factor in ACG? Absolutely, 100% yes. Audrey is saying Brady uses Saros cycles for the eclipses. That's what you use for eclipses. And Marlene, we already answered that. So Karen, I'm going to give that to Joseph. Where does declination fit in with these positional methods? Thank you for that question, Karen.
So declination is more of a consideration used in the calculation of astrocartography. And since right ascension and declination are I think that those coordinates are used only in astrocartography. So you're not going to find them in any other astromapping technique. Did that answer it?
Yes, but Karen, declination is inferred through the maps.
Yeah. So it's okay. Remember how we had said earlier that line, that little wavy line that goes through the star maps? We had pointed that out. Well, you'll see that same line, kind of wavy kind of pattern going through an astrocartography map, right? And that has a lot to do with declination. So where she had said Enmundo versus the Dicol, this was another point that we didn't mention. In the Enmundo technique, you'll see that the planets will, on that little wavy line, that's like their quote zenith points. They'll all be on that line. But when you're using the Enmundo technique, not zodiacal, the Enmundo technique the correct way, you'll see that the zenith points of the planets won't necessarily be on that wavy line, but they'll be along it. That's kind of the visual way to see how declination plays a role in the calculations.
I think we probably have to close it here, right, Lori? I mean, this is
Yeah, well, you answered all the questions, like amazing. Boom, 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 boom. So I want to thank the both of you for all of this amazing information. I have a personal interest because I love astromapping and I'm really looking forward to the class. I want to thank all of you who stayed with us. I know we've gone longer than usual, but hey, why not? This is a fantastic topic. We have amazing presenters. Thank you, Misty, for being in the chat room and taking care of that. And I'm Lori with Kepler College. Thank you to Cindy McKean. Thank you to Joseph Milnes. We hope to see you in a class, another webinar, a workshop, YouTube, wherever you hang out. We hope to see you there. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.